Hi, come read with me. I'm still working on reading Six of One and Half a Dozen the Other. This is my autobiography, a memoir. We're on the chapter called Friends. One would think that a house already full of children that we would not want extra people around. But such was not the case. We each had our own personal friends, and we often had them over to spend an afternoon or a night. Sundays were visitation days because most of our friends were from church. Knowing that we would be returning to church in the evening, the friends were often allowed to come home with us after morning service, just for the day. Sometimes we would spend the afternoon at their house. But with a jam-packed car, Mama had to be discerning when deciding visits to our home. Sometimes, though, we would sort of make a trade, one child for another. If Joyce or Fonda were going to visit a friend of theirs, then Randall or I might have had a friend over for the afternoon. These visits were determined by a lot of variables and kept Mama busy trying to keep track. For instance, who was designated to fix Sunday dinner, or what child went somewhere last week. Also, occasionally, but not often, one of us were grounded and had to stay home. Grounding wasn't something that happened often in our house simply because we did not have many activities to be grounded from. Mama refused to ground us from attending church or church functions because she felt they were good for us. And since they were our principal activity, we seldom were denied outings. In other circumstances, we were disciplined quickly and sharply, and that was the end of it. Though being the recipient of this type of correction was hard, it was probably the best way. Some people believe that children should not be spanked, but I disagree. When done in a consistent and humane way, spanking can be a great deterrent to disobedience, disrespect, and general bad behavior. I believe it is far more harmful to let children run their own program without consistent discipline because it takes away their feeling of security. A child that is disciplined feels secure, knowing that his parents care about him. That is, if the discipline is tempered with love and restraint. I was seldom spanked because I knew if I disobeyed I would have to pay the price, and I did not like the price. I was generally a good child. In fact, I joked that I was so well behaved that Mama doesn't remember me. This is the classic middle child syndrome. Once, not long ago, I asked her if I was a good child growing up. She replied, "I don't remember." I do remember being the recipient of her discipline a few times. Usually I felt it was without just cause. Once, while trying to explain my reason for doing a certain thing which was causing me to be the recipient of her discipline, she thought I was too sassy and slapped my face. I was careful to watch my tongue after that. It did not take more than once or twice of that kind of discipline for me to change my attitude or action. Barring any restrictions, Mama would often allow one or two visitors on Sunday afternoon. Then our day would be full of ball games, jump rope, hide and seek, and other such activities. Our favorite was baseball because we always had enough participants for a full team. Sometimes our neighbors would form their own team and play against us. Other times we would play fly ball. I had two friends in particular with whom I spent a lot of time. One was Patty, and the other was Frances. I had known Patty since we first began attending the small neighborhood church, so we were especially close. She and I had little in common except for our ages and our church affiliation. She had dark brown, thick, naturally curly hair. She was from a prosperous family, therefore she lacked nothing. She was involved in after-school programs and took piano lessons. She was the last child of her family, with several years between her and the older siblings. Consequently, she was like an only child. When I went to Patty's house to visit, I had a hard time adjusting to the quiet. I'm sure that when she came to mine, she had the opposite problem. On Sunday afternoons, when I went to her home, her father would fix us Coca-Cola or root beer and vanilla ice cream floats. Sometimes her aunts would come by and they would all play gin rummy. That was odd to me because playing cards were never allowed in our house. I met Frances at school when I was in the 5th grade. I invited her to church with us and she became a regular, riding in our already full car. Frances had a few younger brothers and one older sister. She and I had a lot in common, except that her family was Hispanic and did not speak much English. Frances and I did most of our visiting on the school playground. Patty attended a different school in Fresno, so I only saw her at church. I did not have many other friends, and I was at times a very lonely child. Later, I became friends with Martha. She was a church friend and a school friend. When the older children were teenagers, they would bring home friends for the day, and we younger children, being excluded from their company, would find ways to torment them. Once Fonda had her best friend Betty over, and they were looking for something to do, and decided to try a new recipe for no-bake chocolate cookies. It was not unusual for us to make cookies or cake on Sunday afternoon. It was unusual to make unbaked cookies. We had not tried them previously. This sounded like a good idea, and they set out to give it a try. The recipe called for oats, and they found the recipe, but something went wrong, and the cookies turned into a sticky, dark brown goo. This did not deter us younger kids too much. We decided that they might be okay after all, and opted to be brave and try them in spite of the appearance. When I started to take a bite of the cookie, I noticed something moving around in the goo. "What's this?" I asked. Then upon closer inspection, I discovered that the dessert was full of live weevils, which had gone unnoticed by the girls in the oats. All of the cookies got tossed into the trash. Needless to say, that was one recipe that was not tested in our home again. Although we were not as good at it as Randall, we often tried our hand at pranks and practical jokes. Having our older siblings, friends in the house gave us a perfect opportunity to apply our skills. Usually the older child was busy with their friend and failed to notice that we were up to some mischief that they might be the recipient of. Teenage Fonda and her friend Betty were the unfortunate mark for some of these impromptu pranks. Joyce and I offered the two of them some cool refreshment. This should have been their first clue that we were up to no good, but they fell right into it. "How thoughtful," unsuspecting Betty said. We made a pitcher of green Kool-Aid, and after pouring it into the ice-filled drinking glasses, we also added some cheap green perfume. We thought this was a great prank and would be received in good humor that it was intended. Instead, when they took a sip of that aromatic concoction, they became enraged, and we were banished from their area for the remainder of the day. Not surprisingly, we had a few opportunities for this sort of shenanigan. The older children were soon on to the inevitable fact that if they intended to keep their friends, they must keep them away from the rest of us. Consequently, as they grew older, they spent more and more time at the houses of their friends than at our home. Smart move. Mama had a few friends as well: Joan, Mrs. Kidd, and Beulah. Her friend Beulah was a woman from our church, and I felt was rather odd. Although I was young, I had decided that she was quite peculiar. I was very uncomfortable around her and avoided her when possible. She lived in a small house with her 80-something-year-old mother and a grown son, who was in his 40s. She did not drive and would call the house and ask Mama to pick her up for church. This in itself seemed unusual to me because we always had a car that was too crowded to begin with. But she would call every time and there was church and request a ride. Mama always gave her one. Beulah may not have been as odd as I perceived her, except that she had a peculiarity about her that I found most annoying. She never talked above a whisper. She claimed it was due to some fright she had as a child, when a bus that she was riding in capsized. To me, this seemed a highly unlikely reason to start whispering and continue for the rest of your life. But that was her way, and nothing was going to change her. The only time I ever heard her speak in a voice loud enough to be heard was when she was praying in church, and then she would yell, and it would come out like a squeaky wheel sound. Perhaps she had some damage to her vocal cords and really could not help it. She was nice enough, though. Perhaps the problem was that little things annoyed me. One evening, she and her mother requested that I come and stay the night because Beulah and her son would not be there. She felt someone needed to be there to take care of her mother. I was 11 years old and didn't think much I could be much help if need arose. But I went. Her aged mother seemed okay, We were watching TV, but the picture on the screen was flipping around. I knew how to fix it. I adjusted the horizontal control knob on the back of the television and straightened it out. When it came time to go to bed, Beulah's mother fixed me a bed on the couch with about 10 blankets piled on me. I never slept so warm. Well, you can imagine my dismay when in 1965, Mama went into the hospital to have a diseased kidney removed. The kidney was full of kidney stones, and it made her deathly ill. The surgery or the hospital stay wasn't what caused my dilemma. It was because Mama asked Beulah to come and stay with us to watch over the children while she was in the hospital. Joyce, who was older than me, was still at home. I was 15 years old and did not feel that we needed watching after. The major problem with this arrangement was that Beulah had never cooked for more than 2 or 3 people in her life, these being her frail, bird-like mother and her son. She did not know how to cook for a pack of hungry children. Our family consumed mountains of food daily, and though we did not have the best fare in the world, we needed lots of it. Beulah simply did not have the proper training for the task she was about to endeavor. Our first evening meal with her consisted of 1 can of corn, a few small pieces of meat, and a few slices of bread. It was plain to see that if Beulah stayed, we would all have malnutrition by the time Mama returned. Beulah was sent on her way. Joyce and I took over the cooking, and the family resumed to a somewhat normal, at least for us, routine. Mama's surgery was quite serious, and it took her a long time to recover. She had an interesting story about how after her return from the hospital, the angel of death came to take her, and she asked to be allowed to stay long enough to raise her children. It happened during the day when most of us were at school, but Eileen, who was only 4 years old at the time, was home. She went into the bedroom and asked Mama, what was that bright light in here? Mama knew then that it had not just been a dream. She did survive to raise her children and even to help with some of the many grandchildren. Mama was a firm believer in being in church when the doors were opened. She was faithful to church, and nothing short of death or dire disease would keep her away. The surgery was the only prolonged absence she had from church. As a church pianist, she took her responsibilities seriously. She knew that God and the congregation were counting on her, and she rarely missed a service. Mama was a doer, and though we youngsters had a lot of responsibility too, Mama was seldom idle. There were always things that needed doing, and she did them. She canned and froze fruits and vegetables for later use, reupholstered furniture, and sewed clothing and drapes. She shopped to find the bargains to feed us all, cooked many of the meals, and chauffeured us here and there as needed. We rarely could afford for any of us children to be in extracurricular activities. That was good because she would have spent her whole life driving us around. If there had been public transportation out in the country, which there wasn't, we wouldn't have had the money for the fare. Some of the children did participate in band and choir, though. Fonda was involved in drama. Joyce played cello. I played violin for a brief few months until we moved to a different school, and I was unable to continue. I, Chris, and Dorothy all sang in church or in school choir, and one year I had the opportunity to sing in a teen talent contest through our church affiliation. Mama had taught us all to sing, but singing was born in me. I sang all the time. I had a high soprano voice and could really sense the heart of music. I sang while I worked. Like the slaves in the plantations, my load was lightened as I sang. Even while in the fields cutting grapes for raisins, I sang. I sang while playing, and I sang at church. When I was not singing in a trio with Joyce and Fonda, I sang solos at church. My favorite songs were In the Garden, Supper Time, and I Believe. These I sang with real conviction, as if I had been in the garden with Jesus, had been by the bedside of a dying mother, and yes, believe. Mama groomed my voice, taught me to sight read music, and exposed me to all sorts of wonderful songs. When I would protest about practicing, which I rarely did, she would say, "What if you're asked to sing?" That was all it took. Then I would practice, knowing that I could not say no if asked. I felt as much responsibility to respond to a request for me to sing as Mama had for playing the piano. She told me that my singing moved people. I do not believe that I had anything to do with it. God had called me, and I sang because I could do nothing else. He had put the song in my heart. The song had to come out. It was His Spirit that affected people, not me. Often when I sing, it affects me too. Motivating me to sing wasn't too much of a problem. Motivating us to get things done, that's another story. Mama had her ways. And just a side note, my granddaughter is 9 years old, and she is at present staying here with me and her mom. And she, like me, sings all the time. She has a beautiful voice, and I just think every time how I was when I was that age.